David Reed pressed his palm against the identification panel and watched the doors slide open. The Galactic Medical Academy stretched before him like a crystal cathedral floating in space. Transparent walkways connected dozens of spherical learning pods, each one housing students from species he had only seen in textbooks. His heart hammered against his ribs as he stepped inside, joining the flow of beings heading toward orientation. A towering creature with 6 legs and fur that shifted colors walked past him without a second glance. 2 small floating beings that looked like jellyfish drifted overhead, their tentacles carrying datapads. David adjusted the strap of his bag and reminded himself that he belonged here. The acceptance letter had said so, even if his reflection in the polished floor showed the only 2-legged mammal in sight. The orientation hall curved upward in a way that defied Earth physics. Seats arranged themselves automatically as students entered, accommodating different body types and sizes. David found himself wedged between a crystalline being that hummed softly and a reptilian student whose scales reflected the light in rainbow patterns. Neither acknowledged him as the room dimmed and a holographic display materialized at the center. Professor Quinn materialized on the central platform. Her feathered body resembled an earth owl, but her 4 eyes scanned the room with an intelligence that made David sit straighter. Her beak clicked once, and the universal translator in his ear converted the sound into words. "Welcome to your first year at the Galactic Medical Academy. You represent 247 species from across 73 sectors. You are the future of medicine in our galaxy." The students around David radiated pride. He felt small and very alone. "Each species brings unique perspectives to the healing arts," Professor Quinn continued. Her upper eyes focused on David while her lower pair scanned the rest of the room. "This year, we have our first student from Earth, a Class 4 Death World." Every being in the room turned to stare at him. David felt his face grow hot. The crystalline student beside him shifted away slightly, creating more space between them. "Humans have only recently joined our galactic community," Professor Quinn said. "Their medical knowledge developed in isolation, using methods we may find unusual. I expect you all to approach differences with curiosity rather than judgment." The lecture moved on to curriculum details, but David barely heard it. He was too aware of the eyes still glancing his way, the subtle movements of students edging away from him. When the orientation ended, he followed the crowd toward the practical demonstration labs, trying to blend in despite being obviously different. The medical laboratory looked nothing like the hospitals David had trained in back on Earth. Instead of stainless steel and harsh lighting, everything glowed softly with bioluminescence. Equipment floated in midair, responding to gestures and thoughts. A demonstration patient lay on a hovering platform, its holographic body cycling through different species' anatomies. Professor Quinn stood beside a table covered in devices David had never seen before. She picked up something that looked like a crystal wand. "This is a cellular stabilizer. When a patient experiences trauma, we use it to prevent cellular degradation while preparing proper treatment." She demonstrated on the holographic patient. The device emitted a soft blue light, and readouts showed the patient's cells freezing in their current state. No bleeding, no deterioration, just suspended animation until more advanced care could be provided. "Treatment in galactic medicine follows 3 principles," Professor Quinn explained. "First, cause no pain. Second, allow natural healing enhanced by technology. Third, never intervene violently in the body's processes." Nala, the reptilian student David had sat near, raised a clawed hand. "What about emergency situations, when time is critical?" "We have medical drones stationed throughout all civilized areas," Professor Quinn said. "Response time averages 4 to 6 minutes. The cellular stabilizers keep patients viable until drones arrive with full treatment capabilities." David's hand moved before he could stop it, Professor Quinn's 4 eyes fixed on him. "Yes, David Reed." What if the drones can't get there in time? His voice sounded too loud in the quiet lab. What if someone stops breathing or their heart stops? The room went silent. Professor Quinn's head tilted in a way that reminded David of Earth birds considering prey. Hearts do not simply stop in healthy individuals. If catastrophic failure occurs, cellular stabilizers maintain tissue viability until regeneration equipment arrives. But on Earth, we have CPR, David said. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Manual chest compressions to keep blood flowing and rescue breathing to provide oxygen. Rosen, the crystalline student, made a sound like wind chimes. You compress the chest while the patient is in distress. To keep them alive, David said. Professor Quinn's feathers ruffled. We will discuss Earth medical techniques later. For now, let us continue with standard galactic protocols. The demonstration continued, but David felt the shift in the room. Students whispered to each other, their voices too low for his translator to catch individual words. He caught fragments: barbaric, primitive, violent. After class, David walked alone through the transparent corridors back to his quarters. Ships docked and undocked at the station's ports, carrying beings from worlds he would never visit. Through the floor, he could see the planet below, a gas giant with storms larger than Earth. His quarters were small but comfortable, designed to accommodate his specific needs. Earth normal gravity, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, temperature set to 20 degrees. A message waited on his communication panel from his parents back home, asking how his first day went. David sat on his bed and stared out at the stars. He had dreamed of this opportunity for years, fought harder than anyone to earn his place here. But now he wondered if human medicine was too different, too harsh, too rooted in a world where help did not arrive in 4 minutes and technology could not always save you. His datapad chimed with his schedule for tomorrow. Emergency medicine principles. He laughed without humor. In a galaxy where emergencies barely existed, what would they even teach? The cafeteria occupied an entire sphere near the center of Harmony Point Station. Students from dozens of species gathered around tables that adjusted their height and composition based on who sat there. Some ate solid foods, others absorbed nutrients through specialized ports, and a few simply basked under specific light frequencies. The air hummed with conversation in 100 languages, all filtered through universal translators into a comprehensible buzz. David carried his tray to an empty section near the viewing window. Earth food synthesized by the station's replicators never quite tasted right, but it was close enough. He stabbed at something that was supposed to be chicken and watched a supply ship dock 3 levels below. "May I join you?" Tiv stood beside his table, holding a tray with what looked like algae soup. The amphibious student's skin was a mottled green-blue, and his large eyes blinked with inner and outer lids. David nodded, surprised and grateful. "I wanted to apologize for the others," Tiv said, as he settled into a chair that immediately filled with water to accommodate his needs. Many students have never met a Deathworlder before. They are curious but also frightened. "Frightened of what?" David asked. "I'm just here to learn medicine." "Your world kills you constantly," Tiv said matter-of-factly. "Weather, predators, diseases, even your own gravity. We read the reports. Earth humans evolved to survive conditions that would destroy most species within hours. That kind of resilience is intimidating." Before David could respond, Nala appeared with her own tray. The reptilian student's scales caught the light as she sat down. "I am also interested in your medical techniques. The CPR you mentioned yesterday. How does compressing the chest restart a heart?" David set down his fork. Finally, someone wanted to understand rather than just judge. "It doesn't restart the heart exactly. It manually pumps blood through the body to keep oxygen flowing to the brain and vital organs. You buy time until you can use a defibrillator or the heart restarts on its own." "But you said ribs break during this process," Rosen added, floating over to join them. The crystalline student did not eat but seemed drawn to the conversation. How is breaking bones considered medicine? Because broken ribs heal, David explained. Brain death from oxygen deprivation doesn't. You do the least harmful thing that keeps the person alive. Tiv reached for something on his tray, a small cube of compressed vegetation. He popped it into his mouth and began chewing. Then his eyes went wide. His hands flew to his throat and his skin flushed a dark purple color. Tiv, Nala leaned forward. Are you well? The amphibious student made a choking sound. His mouth opened and closed, but no air moved. He stood up, knocking his chair backward, and his webbed hands clawed at his neck. Students at nearby tables turned to watch. Someone called for help. An alert chimed on everyone's datapad. Medical drone dispatched, estimated arrival 7 minutes. 7 minutes. David saw Tiv's skin growing darker, saw the panic in his eyes. The student dropped to his knees and his movements became more desperate. He's choking, David said, standing up. Something's blocking his airway. Nala pulled out a small device, one of the cellular stabilizers from class. She pointed it at Tiv, but nothing happened. It only works on cellular damage, not obstructions. Move back, David said. He came around the table and positioned himself behind Tiv. The student was taller than him, but David adjusted his stance. I'm going to help you. This might hurt. He locked his hands together just below Tiv's ribcage and pulled inward and upward sharply. Tiv's body jerked. David did it again, harder this time. He felt Tiv's anatomy shift under the pressure, different from human physiology but similar enough. Third compression. Fourth. Stop, you're hurting him, someone shouted from another table. David ignored them. Fifth compression. Tiv's skin was nearly black now. Sixth compression, and he put all his strength into it. Tiv's body convulsed, and the cube of food shot from his mouth, skittering across the floor. The amphibious student gasped, a horrible wet sound that was the most beautiful thing David had ever heard. Air rushed into Tiv's lungs. His skin slowly returned to its normal green-blue color. He coughed and gasped, leaning heavily on David for support. The cafeteria had gone completely silent. Hundreds of students stared at them. David realized what they had just seen, a human violently grabbing another student and crushing his abdomen repeatedly. Without context, it looked like an assault. Medical drones arrived 3 minutes later, their sensors sweeping over Tiv. One of them scanned David as well, perhaps checking if he was the threat. The drone's mechanical voice announced findings. Patient Tiv experiencing minor bruising to internal organs. Breathing normal. Oxygen levels returning to baseline. Obstruction cleared from respiratory passage. Security personnel appeared, 2 beings David had never seen before. They were heavily armored and carried weapons. Come with us, one said to David. You need to answer questions about this incident. He saved my life, Tiv managed to say, his voice raspy. I could not breathe. The medical drones would have arrived too late. Irrelevant, the security officer said. Physical intervention is not permitted without authorization. Professor Quinn's voice cut through the crowd. I will handle this. She walked toward them, her feathers slightly raised. David Reed, come with me to my office immediately. Security, I will file a full report within the hour. The security personnel looked unhappy but did not argue with a senior professor. David followed Professor Quinn out of the cafeteria, acutely aware of every eye tracking his movement. Behind him, he heard Tiv trying to explain what happened, but the crowd's murmuring drowned out individual voices. They walked in silence through the corridors. David's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fatting. He had done the right thing. He knew he had, but right by Earth standards might be criminal by galactic law. Professor Quinn's office door opened at her approach. She gestured for David to enter, and he stepped inside, wondering if this was how his medical career ended before it even began. Professor Quinn's office wrapped around the outer edge of the medical wing like a curved observatory. One entire wall showed the medical training rooms below, where students practiced on holographic patients. The other wall displayed space itself, stars scattered across the darkness like scattered diamonds. David stood in the middle of it all, feeling very small. "Sit," Professor Quinn said, gesturing to a chair that rose from the floor. She settled onto a perch designed for her species, all four eyes fixed on him. "Show me exactly what you did." David had expected anger or accusations. This clinical curiosity caught him off guard. "I performed the Heimlich maneuver. It's a first aid technique for clearing blocked airways." "Demonstrate," slowly. Professor Quinn produced a holographic projection of Tiv's body, frozen at the moment before David's intervention. David walked through the motion step by step, explaining the hand placement, the upward thrust, the goal of creating enough pressure to dislodge the obstruction. Professor Quinn watched without interruption, her head tilting at different angles as she analyzed every movement. "You knew this would cause internal bruising," she said when he finished. "Yes." "You knew it would cause pain." "Yes." "Yet you did it anyway." David met her gaze. "Because bruises heal in a week. Brain damage from oxygen deprivation is permanent. Tiv would have died waiting for the medical drones." Professor Quinn tapped something on her display, and footage from the cafeteria played on the wall. David watched himself grab Tiv, watched the violent compressions, watched the food projectile expelled from Tiv's mouth, watched the crowd's horrified reactions. "Do you understand why this is problematic?" Professor Quinn asked. "Because it looks violent," David said. "Because galactic medicine evolved differently. Because you have better technology and never needed desperate measures." Partially correct. Professor Quinn brought up new images, charts showing response times across different sectors. "We have medical drones because we prioritize their development. We have cellular stabilizers because our ancestors could not bear to watch others suffer. Our entire medical philosophy centers on minimizing harm and allowing natural processes enhanced by gentle technology." "That's amazing," David said honestly. "But what about places where that technology doesn't exist yet? What about emergencies where every second counts?" Professor Quinn's feathers smoothed. "Earth developed differently. Tell me, how did your species create these violent medical techniques?" David thought about the history lessons from medical school. "We had wars, natural disasters, accidents in dangerous workplaces, people dying in situations where help was hours away or not coming at all. So we learned to do something, anything, to keep people alive long enough for real help to arrive. CPR was invented because people drowned in places without hospitals. The Heimlich maneuver exists because people choke at dinner tables far from emergency rooms. Tourniquets save soldiers bleeding out on battlefields." "Your medicine was born from desperation," Professor Quinn said softly. "Our medicine was born from refusing to accept death," David corrected. "When the only choice is between doing nothing and doing something violent, we chose violence. Controlled violence, measured violence, but violence that saves lives." Professor Quinn pulled up more data, scrolling through information faster than David could read. "I have been reviewing Earth medical texts since you arrived. Your history is filled with procedures that would horrify most galactic citizens. You cut people open with knives. You poison them with chemicals to kill diseases. You break bones to set them correctly. You shock hearts with electricity. You amputate limbs to prevent infection spread. All of those techniques were developed when we had no other choice," David said. "As our technology improved, we found better ways. But the basic principle remains: save the life first, heal the damage second. And if the patient suffers during the saving, then they're alive to suffer," David said. "Pain is temporary, death is permanent." Professor Quinn was quiet for a long moment. Her upper eyes watched David while her lower eyes studied the medical texts on her display. Finally, she spoke. I cannot officially condone what you did today. Galactic medical ethics are clear about causing intentional harm, even with good intentions. David's stomach sank. However, Professor Quinn continued, I also cannot ignore that Tiv is alive because of your intervention. The medical drone's analysis confirms he would have suffered irreversible brain damage within another 90 seconds. You calculated risk versus benefit in a crisis situation and acted appropriately by your training. So what happens now? David asked. Now you will teach us. Professor Quinn's declaration made David blink in surprise. I am assigning you to prepare a comprehensive seminar on human emergency medical techniques. You will present to your class within 1 week. You will explain not just the how but the why. You will help us understand this philosophy of controlled harm in service of healing. You want me to teach alien medical students how to hurt people to save them. I want you to bridge two very different approaches to medicine, Professor Quinn said. Galactic medicine assumes access to advanced technology and rapid response. Earth medicine assumes neither of those things. There may be situations where your desperate measures are exactly what is needed, even in our advanced society. The docking bay accident last year killed 3 beings because medical drones could not navigate the debris field in time. Perhaps your techniques would have made a difference. David felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What if they're too horrified to learn? Then you will have failed as a teacher, Professor Quinn said bluntly. But I do not think you will fail. I watched that cafeteria footage carefully. Yes, students were shocked, but I also saw Nala trying to help. I saw Rosen timing your compressions instinctively. I saw Tiv conscious and grateful. Fear can be overcome with understanding. She stood and David rose as well. You have 1 week to prepare your presentation. Use the medical library, request any equipment you need, and be ready to defend every technique you demonstrate. This will not be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, David said. Professor Quinn's beak clicked in what might have been approval. Dismissed. And David, try not to assault anyone else before your presentation. It took him a moment to realize she was joking. The amphitheater filled slowly, students trickling in with the cautious energy of people approaching something they both feared and could not look away from. David stood at the center platform, surrounded by equipment he had requested from the medical supply department. A crash test dummy, basic first aid supplies, and a holographic projector he had programmed with human anatomical data. 30 students represented 12 different species, their body types ranging from the familiar to the completely alien. Tiv sat in the front row, his skin showing healthy green-blue tones. Nala took a seat beside him, her scales reflecting nervous patterns. Rosen hovered near the back, humming softly. Professor Quinn stood at the rear door, observing but not interfering. David cleared his throat, and the translator converted it to various attention-getting sounds for different species. The room quieted. Thank you for coming. I know what you saw in the cafeteria looked brutal. I'm here to explain why humans developed these techniques and why they work. He gestured to the holographic display, which showed a human body with circulatory and respiratory systems highlighted. Earth humans evolved on a Class 4 death world. That classification exists because our planet actively tries to kill us. Whether extremes, predators, diseases, environmental hazards. We developed medicine in a world where help was often hours or days away, if it came at all. A student, David, did not recognize raised a tentacle. Why not simply wait for proper medical care? Because waiting means death, David said. Let me show you. He activated the crash test dummy, positioning it on the floor. This represents a human in cardiac arrest. Heart stopped, breathing stopped. Brain damage begins in 4 minutes. Irreversible damage in 6 minutes. Death in 10 minutes. Medical drones average 7 minutes response time in civilized areas. On Earth, in remote locations, help might take an hour. The room shifted uncomfortably. So we do this. David knelt beside the dummy and placed his hands on its chest. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. I pushed down approximately 5 centimeters, compressing the heart between the sternum and spine, manually forcing blood through the body. 30 compressions, then 2 rescue breaths to oxygenate the blood. Repeat until the heart restarts or professional help arrives. He demonstrated, and the dummy's internal sensors showed the force involved. The display calculated pressure per square centimeter. Rosen's humming became sharp. That force would fracture human ribs. It often does, David confirmed, not stopping the compressions. Studies show 30% of CPR patients experience broken ribs, but broken ribs heal in 6 weeks. Brain death is forever. The benefits outweigh the harm. He continued for 2 minutes, then stopped, breathing hard. This is exhausting. In real situations, multiple people take turns to maintain effective compressions. The alternative is watching someone die. Nala leaned forward. Your species chose controlled violence over helplessness. We chose action over acceptance, David said. Let me show you another technique. He produced a length of fabric and a wooden rod. Tourniquet, used for severe bleeding that cannot be stopped with pressure. You place it above the wound and tighten until blood flow stops. He demonstrated on the dummy's arm, twisting the rod until the fabric compressed tightly. That would cut off all blood to the limb, a student said from the middle rows. Yes, David agreed. For a limited time, that's acceptable. You might lose the limb, but you save the life. Again, we're choosing the lesser harm. He moved through other techniques. Pressure points to control bleeding, emergency airway management, proper wound packing. Each one drew gasps or sounds of distress from his audience. Some students left halfway through, unable to watch. Those who remained seemed split between fascination and horror. Why do you not simply use cellular stabilizers? Rosen asked, the question David had been waiting for. We only invented them 10 years ago, David said, and most of Earth still does not have access to them. 80% of our population lives in areas where advanced medical technology is too expensive or too far away. These techniques exist because they work with resources anyone can access. Hands, fabric, basic tools. He pulled up historical data on the holographic display. Before widespread CPR training in the 1960s, cardiac arrest outside a hospital was nearly always fatal. After training programs began, survival rates increased by 200%. The Heimlich maneuver, invented in 1974, has saved over 100,000 lives. Modern tourniquets have saved thousands of soldiers who would have bled to death on battlefields. The numbers spoke louder than any argument. David saw students calculating, comparing, reassessing their initial horror. I have a question about ethics. Tiv's voice was still raspy but clear. When I was choking, you did not ask permission. You simply acted. Why? Implied consent, David explained. When someone is unconscious or unable to communicate, we assume they would want to live. If you were conscious and refused help, I would have respected that. But you were dying and could not speak. I made the choice I believed you would make. Survive first, deal with bruises later. You were correct, Tiv said simply. I am grateful to have bruises instead of a grave. A student near the front that resembled a large insect raised a foreleg. These techniques assume biological similarity to humans. How would they work on different species? David smiled. This was the question he had hoped for. They would need adaptation. That's why I'm teaching the principles, not just the procedures. Understand the goal, which is maintaining blood flow and oxygen to the brain, then adapt the technique to the patient's anatomy. Tiv's biology is different from mine, but the Heimlich maneuver worked because the principle is universal. Create pressure to dislodge obstructions. He spent the next 20 minutes demonstrating adapted techniques for different body types, using holographic models of various species. The students began asking more questions, probing deeper into the logic behind each technique. Professor Quinn finally stepped forward as the session approached its end. Questions or comments? Rosen floated to the front. I wish to learn these techniques properly. When Earth humans calculate that broken ribs are acceptable costs to save a life, they have done the mathematics. I respect that precision. Nala stood as well. I want to understand how to adapt these techniques for my species. On my homeworld, we have regions where medical technology is limited. This knowledge could save lives. One by one, students voiced their interest. Not all of them, but more than David had dared hope. The alarm shattered the quiet evening study period like glass breaking. David looked up from his medical texts as red emergency lights flooded the corridor outside his quarters. His datapad chimed urgently with an automated message. Catastrophic failure in docking Bay 7. All medical personnel report immediately. He grabbed the first aid kit he had assembled from Earth-style supplies and ran toward the transport tubes. Other students emerged from their quarters, confusion evident in their movements and sounds. Professor Quinn's voice came over the station-wide communication system, calm but urgent. Medical students, you are authorized to assist. Follow emergency protocols and defer to senior staff. The transport tube dropped David 3 levels in seconds. He emerged into chaos. Docking Bay 7 was a twisted wreck of metal and sparking conduits. A cargo ship had malfunctioned during docking procedures, and its engine core had exploded. Smoke filled the air despite environmental systems working overtime. Emergency force fields flickered, barely holding atmosphere in the damaged sections. Injured workers lay scattered across the deck. Some moved, crying out in pain. Others lay still. Medical drones hovered in confusion, their programming overwhelmed by the mix of species, injuries, and environmental hazards. The drones kept requesting clarification, unable to prioritize when their protocols demanded treating patients in order of arrival rather than severity. David's training kicked in before conscious thought. He scanned the scene, counting casualties, assessing the situation. 15 visible patients. More might be trapped in the wreckage. Toxic gas leaking from damaged conduits meant time was critical. The drones would figure out their protocols eventually, but eventually meant deaths. Nala arrived beside him, her emergency medical kit clutched in her claws. What do we do? Triage, David said. He pulled out colored strips from his kit, the improvised system he had prepared just in case. Red for critical, yellow for urgent, green for stable, black for deceased. We sort them by priority, not arrival time. He ran to the nearest patient, a being with 6 limbs and chitinous plating, severe bleeding from a crushed leg. Conscious but in shock. David tied a red strip around the uninjured limb and moved to the next. Nala watched for 3 seconds, then understood. She began sorting patients on the other side of the bay. Rosen appeared, followed by Tiv and a half-dozen other students from David's presentation. Tell us what to do, Rosen said. Red tags first, David called out. Stop bleeding, maintain airways, keep them alive until the drones can treat them properly. He reached a worker pinned under debris, blood pooling beneath her. Without hesitation, David pulled the tourniquet from his kit and wrapped it above the wound. The injured worker made a sound of pain, but the bleeding slowed to a trickle. Red tag. Next patient. A technician lay motionless, not breathing. David checked for a pulse, found a faint flutter. He tilted the patient's head back, checked the airway, and began chest compressions. The patient's body structure was different from humans, but the principle remained the same. Find the heart, compress it manually, force blood to flow. Tiv appeared at his side. I can do this. Show me where to place my hands. David guided Tiv's webbed hands to the correct position, adjusted the angle. Push here, 5 centimeters deep, 100 compressions per minute. I will handle breathing. Together they worked, human and amphibian united in the desperate rhythm of keeping a stranger alive. Nala tied a tourniquet on another patient, her movements clumsy but effective. She had watched David's demonstration, remembered the principles, adapted them to her own strength and anatomy. A student, David, did not know well tried to stabilize a patient's broken limb, using techniques from the presentation. Professor Quinn arrived with senior medical staff and proper equipment. Her 4 eyes swept the scene, taking in the color-coded patients, the students performing emergency interventions, the controlled chaos of triage in action. She did not stop them. Instead, she directed the arriving medical drones to the red-tagged patients first. "Critical patients to the medical wing immediately," she ordered. "Urgent patients to secondary treatment. Stable patients wait here for evaluation." The medical drones, given clear priorities, moved with efficient purpose. They scooped up red-tagged patients, advanced treatment beginning before they even left the docking bay. David and Tiv continued CPR until a drone arrived to take over with a full cardiac regeneration unit. The patient's heart restarted, and David nearly collapsed from exhaustion. "Next patient," he said instead, pushing himself up. The next hour blurred together. David moved from patient to patient, stopping bleeding with tourniquets and pressure points, maintaining airways, performing CPR twice more. Nala worked beside him, her initial squeamishness forgotten in the face of immediate need. Rosen timed compressions for students who were tiring, ensuring rhythm stayed consistent. Tiv taught other amphibious students adapted techniques for their anatomy. When the last patient was evacuated to proper medical care, David sat on the deck and stared at his hands. They were covered in various colors of blood, none of it human. His entire body shook with adrenaline crash. Around him, other students sat in similar states of exhaustion and shock. Professor Quinn approached, stepping carefully over debris. "Casualty report," she said to a senior medical officer beside her. 15 patients total, 13 critical, 2 urgent, 0 fatalities, all patients stabilized and responding to treatment. Professor Quinn's gaze swept over the exhausted students. Without the triage system and emergency interventions, we would have lost at least 4 patients. The medical drone's protocols were insufficient for this scenario. The students' actions made the difference between life and death. She looked directly at David. "Your violent medicine saved lives today." David was too tired to feel vindicated. He just nodded. Medical personnel began clearing the bay, ensuring no one was trapped in the wreckage. Students slowly stood, helping each other up, heading toward decontamination. Nala extended a claw to David, pulling him to his feet. "I understand now," she said quietly. "When death is the only alternative, controlled harm becomes mercy." Tiv joined them, his skin showing patterns of exhaustion but also pride. "We should all learn these techniques properly, not just for Earth humans but adapted for every species. This knowledge is too valuable to ignore." Rosen hummed in agreement, a sound like crystal bells. "The mathematics are clear. Emergency intervention protocols increase survival probability by 37% in catastrophic scenarios. This should be standard medical education." Professor Quinn overheard them. "Then perhaps it will be." 3 weeks after the docking bay accident, David stood before the Academy board in a chamber designed to intimidate. 12 distinguished physicians from across the galaxy occupied floating seats arranged in a semicircle. Each represented a different approach to medicine, a different philosophy of healing. Between them, they had centuries of combined experience and exactly 0 minutes of emergency field medicine. "David Reed," the board chair began, her crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns across the walls. "You stand before us because Professor Quinn has submitted a formal proposal to add human emergency medical protocols to our curriculum. This is unprecedented. We must determine if your techniques align with galactic medical ethics." David had prepared for this. He stood straight, hands clasped behind his back, and met each board member's gaze in turn. "I understand your concerns. Human medicine developed in isolation, under conditions most species never experienced. Our techniques appear violent because they were born from desperation, but I believe they have value even in your advanced society. A board member who resembled a floating mass of bioluminescent gas spoke next. We reviewed the docking bay incident extensively. Your triage system and intervention saved lives. However, you caused pain and injury to patients in the process. 3 individuals suffered broken bones from CPR. 2 experienced severe bruising from tourniquets. How do you justify inflicting harm while claiming to heal? Because the alternative was death, David said simply. Broken bones heal in weeks, bruises fade in days, but brain death from oxygen deprivation is permanent. Blood loss kills within minutes. I performed a cost-benefit analysis in real time and chose the lesser harm every time. You performed calculations on living beings, another board member said, their insected mandibles clicking with disapproval. Medicine should not be mathematics. All medicine is mathematics, Rosen's voice cut through the chamber. David turned to see his crystalline classmate floating near the entrance, unauthorized but undeterred. Every treatment weighs risks against benefits. Every drug calculates dosage against body mass. Every surgery compares invasion against disease. David Reed simply did these calculations in seconds rather than hours. Student Rosen, you are not authorized to speak at this hearing, the board chair said. Then I will speak for him, Professor Quinn said, entering the chamber with Nala and Tiv behind her. As will these students, who lived through the emergency that proved these techniques' worth. The board members exchanged glances, but the chair gestured for them to proceed. Professor Quinn stepped forward. I have spent 3 weeks analyzing every aspect of Earth emergency medicine. I have reviewed historical data, studied outcomes, and interviewed the docking bay survivors. My conclusion is that we have become complacent. She activated a holographic display showing response time data. Medical drones average 6 minutes response time in optimal conditions. In suboptimal conditions, such as areas with debris, interference, or remote locations, response time increases to 15 minutes or more. We have built our entire medical philosophy on the assumption that advanced care will arrive quickly. David Reed's techniques exist for when that assumption fails. Tiv moved forward, his voice still carrying a raspy quality from the choking incident. I died in a room full of medical students because none of us knew how to clear an obstruction. Medical drones were 7 minutes away. I had less than 2 minutes of consciousness remaining. David Reed saved my life with a technique that caused bruising. I will carry those bruises proudly because they prove I survived. Nala spoke next, her scales reflecting nervous patterns but her voice steady. I am from a colony world where medical technology is limited. We have cellular stabilizers but not regeneration equipment. We have medical drones but not enough for our population. When I return home to practice medicine, I will face situations where desperate measures are the only measures available. I want to learn these techniques not because they are human, but because they work. The board chair's light patterns shifted, indicating deep thought. Your arguments have merit. However, we cannot simply add violent techniques to our curriculum without addressing the ethical implications. Our entire medical philosophy centers on minimal intervention and patient comfort. Then perhaps your philosophy is incomplete, David said. The room went silent. He pressed on before courage failed. Galactic medicine is beautiful. Your technology is generations beyond Earth's. Your ethics prioritize dignity and comfort in ways we are still learning to match. But you developed all of this in societies where help always arrived in time, where technology could solve problems before desperate measures became necessary. He pulled up new data on the holographic display, information he had spent weeks compiling. In the last galactic year, 147 beings died in situations where medical drones could not reach them in time. 32 died during the docking bay accident's first 5 minutes, before proper equipment arrived. 83 died in remote locations where response times exceeded 20 minutes. 32 died in disasters where debris prevented drone access. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. These techniques would not have saved all of them, David continued. But statistical analysis suggests they would have saved approximately 40%. That's 58 beings who died because no one knew how to keep them alive for a few extra minutes. A board member David had not heard speak before leaned forward. They appeared almost human, but with subtle differences in proportions and coloring. You propose we teach students to hurt patients, based on the possibility that technology might fail. I propose we teach students to save patients when technology does fail, David corrected. These techniques are not replacements for your advanced medicine. They are bridges. They buy time. They turn a fatal situation into a survivable one, so your beautiful technology has a chance to work its miracles. Professor Quinn stepped beside David. I propose a compromise. We make human emergency protocols an elective course, not a required one. Students who want to learn these techniques can do so voluntarily. We provide full context about their development, clear ethical guidelines for their use, and adaptations for different species. We teach the principles, not just the procedures. The board members conferred quietly among themselves, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of sounds, lights, and movements. Finally, the chair spoke. We will vote, all in favor of adding human emergency medical protocols as an elective course. 7 hands, tentacles, and appendages rose. The chair's light patterns shifted to indicate approval. Motion passes. Professor Quinn, you will oversee curriculum development. David Reed, you will serve as assistant instructor. David felt relief flood through him, but the chair was not finished. However, we require comprehensive documentation of all techniques, full ethical review of each procedure, and quarterly assessments of student outcomes. This is a trial program. We will evaluate its success after 1 academic year. Understood, David said. Thank you. The hearing concluded and David followed Professor Quinn from the chamber. In the corridor outside, a crowd had gathered. Students from his presentation, curious onlookers, even some of the docking bay survivors. They parted as he walked through and he saw something in their eyes he had not seen before. Not fear, not judgment, recognition. Months passed. David taught emergency medicine to classes of alien students who arrived nervous and left competent. They practiced CPR on dummies until muscle memory replaced hesitation. They learned to tie tourniquets with appendages designed for completely different purposes. They studied the philosophy of controlled harm and understood that sometimes saving a life required accepting costs. News spread beyond the academy. Other medical schools requested his curriculum. Galactic medical databases began including human emergency protocols with appropriate warnings and adaptations. Colony worlds with limited technology especially embraced the techniques, finding value in medicine that did not require expensive equipment. David received a message one evening from a mining colony 12 sectors away. A young medic had used CPR to save a worker whose heart stopped during a cave-in. The medic had learned the technique from the Galactic Medical Database, which cited David's work at the Academy. The worker survived with 3 broken ribs and profound gratitude. He sat in his quarters and stared at the message for a long time. Then he looked out at the stars, at the vast galaxy that had once seemed so foreign and unwelcoming. Somewhere out there, humans and aliens worked together, combining the best of both approaches. Advanced technology and desperate determination, gentle healing and violent mercy. Professor Quinn found him there an hour later. You should be proud, she said. You have changed galactic medicine. I just taught them what humans have always known, David said. That when someone is dying, you do whatever it takes to keep them alive. Everything else is details. That philosophy is spreading, Professor Quinn said. Next year, we will have 50 students enrolled in emergency protocols. The year after, perhaps 100. You have given us something we did not know we were missing. What is that? The will to fight death with our bare hands if necessary, she said. We had forgotten that medicine began not with technology, but with the simple refusal to let others die without trying everything possible. David smiled. Welcome to human medicine, Professor. It is brutal, desperate, and absolutely necessary, just like the species that invented it. Outside the window, a new class of students entered the training facility. They came from a dozen worlds, but they shared one thing in common. They were ready to learn that healing sometimes required the courage to cause controlled harm, and that the most advanced medicine in the galaxy still needed the most primitive human virtue, the refusal to give up.